my name's Camoo. Today I'm going to be showing you the basics of embroidery, the supplies you'll need, how to put a pattern on a hoop, how to put fabric on a hoop. I'll be showing you all of that right now. To get started with embroidery, you need a few basic supplies. So I have here a pen, some scissors, a needle, a little piece of fabric, an embroidery hoop, and a few colors of embroidery thread or floss. So what makes embroidery floss special and different from just sewing thread is that it's made of 6 little strands woven together, twisted together. And so that makes for a thicker piece that you can cover more territory with. And an embroidery needle is a bit bigger than a regular sewing needle because it has to have this bigger eye right here to get the threads through, the bigger floss. So with fabric selection, you can really embroider on just about anything, but I like to use this kind of like loose, woven, light fabric because I find it's pretty easy to embroider on, and it's easy to trace through for your design. You know, but of course you can use t-shirts, you can use pants, you can just embroider straight onto clothes, and whatever fabric you can find will probably work. Now an embroidery hoop is this little contraption that's made up of 2 rings really. And so how you get your fabric onto your hoop is what I like to do is I like to put the smaller hoop down, the one that doesn't have this adjustable thing, and you take your piece of fabric and you lay it over. You want to make sure your fabric is big enough to cover it, and then you lay the bigger hoop on top like that. And so that kind of just starts to stretch it. And then you can tighten it a little bit. This contraption tightens or loosens it, so you can tighten it a little bit and then, you know, tug the fabric from behind to make it stretch, to make it more taut. And you want to get to a point where it's pretty nicely stretched. And when you poke it, it doesn't have much give. So I'm gonna get to that point. And then you keep tightening as you go. And eventually, when you have it to the point you want, you can tighten this bad boy all the way up so it won't slip around while you're embroidering. And that makes a really nice, easy surface to stitch on. Now, I will say that how tight you stretch it depends on the type of fabric you're using. So if you're using a fabric like this that's pretty loosely woven, you want to be careful not to overstretch it because then that can kind of pull apart. Like I already have some pulling apart of the fibers and kind of unevenness. And what you really want to be careful with is a t-shirt. So if you're embroidering using a t-shirt, you want to make sure that you don't just stretch it as much as you can, because then when you take it off the hoop, it'll have a weird puckered looking look to it and it won't ever lay flat again. So you want to be very careful when you're using a t-shirt. But I like to embroider onto a different kind of fabric, and then if I want it on a t-shirt, I can just cut and sew it onto the t-shirt after I'm done embroidering it. So now that we have our hoop tightened, I'm going to show you how to thread a needle the way I do it. So I'm going to start out with this nice red, and what you do is you pull a certain, like a good length, like, yeah, that's probably good. You know, it's okay if you have too much, and it's okay if you have too little, because you can always add more and you can always cut too much off. So what I like to do is I take the thread and I make a little loop, just a little loop, and I hold it in between my thumbs. And then I take the needle and I just line the eye of the needle. See, there's the eye of the needle. I just line it up and just kind of push and wiggle that loop through. And sometimes you want to move your thumbs up. So you're just pushing and wiggling all those little strands through. And something that happens a lot with embroidery thread is that you'll kind of miss one, because remember, it's 6 strands woven together. So you might miss one and pull them through, and then you realize there's one that's just hanging off. And that's okay, because you can either take it off and try the whole thing again, or you can try and get that little extra piece through. So we have that threaded, and what we want to do is we want to have a good sized tail. That means this little piece. We want that to be good size so that we're not actually accidentally pulling the needle off. And then we go to the other end and we tie a little knot. So this can be really any knot. It really can be any knot. It doesn't have to be any special knot. So I'm just, tying standard little knot. And what you want to do, the only thing that you want to be sure of is that, if it's a little one, you kind of maybe go over it a couple times, because all this knot is making sure that it's stopping you from pulling the whole thing through when you come up, so that you can keep going. So I'm going to show you a couple different basic stitches. My very favorite stitch, and the one that I use the most often, and what I think is the most utility stitch, is called the split stitch. So you come up, you make sure your knot is on the other side, and see how that's stopping you from pulling it through, and you just make any sort of little, come up and come down somewhere else, just like that. So you have a little line, just a little dash. And what makes it a split stitch is then with your needle on the other side, you come up, you find out where you are, and then you come up, and you want to come up right in between the threads of the last one. So you're not on either side of it, you're splitting it down the middle. And then you just keep doing that. The best looking ones are ones with short dashes, but I tend to use longer dashes just because it covers space more quickly and it still looks pretty nice. And so you'll just keep doing that forever and ever. You come back up and you split those threads, so you're right in the middle of that previous little dash. And this stitch is a very, very good basic stitch because it can easily be used for outlines and for filling in colors if you want. And you just keep on like that. So that's probably good to show. The next stitch we're going to be looking at is called the Satin Stitch. And so this one is basically only used for filling in color. If you have a section of color that you just want it to be a solid color, you'll use the Satin Stitch. So you just come up somewhere. Once again, you make a little dash. And this one, what you do is you're just making a bunch of dashes right next to each other. But the key is that your needle is not going to come up right here. It's not going to come up right next to where you just went down. You're going to bring your needle back to the top like that. And the reason that is because if you do it just right next to it, the stretching of the thread gets weird and it doesn't actually lay flat and it doesn't look good. So this one you're just doing a bunch of these kind of in a row. And see how that's really nicely filling in that space with color. And then it lays pretty flat and it looks pretty nice. So for the chain stitch, this one it looks very nice, and it can be used to fill and it can be used to outline. I personally prefer to use it to outline because it just has a very nice look to it. So what you do is you come up and then you're gonna start to go down basically right next to where you just came up. You might even, go in the same hole that you just came up, and you're gonna start to pull it through, But instead of pulling it all the way through, be very careful not to pull it all the way through. You're going to come up again a little bit down. Do you see how I'm doing that? So then when you pull that up, that thread stops the previous one from going all the way through, and it makes a little chain. And so you just keep repeating that, and then you're gonna go, you know, down again, and instead of pulling all the way through, because you're careful not to pull it all the way through, you're going to come up again a little ways down, if you can see, right there, how about? And then you're gonna pull it so that you're stopping your previous one from being pulled through. So this one is really nice, and sometimes, you know, the first chain looks a little bit, the first chain looks a little bit wonky, and so you can like tug back here. This is what the back looks like. You can tug a little bit to try and tighten it and get it look flat, but see how nice that's kind of starting to look? And you keep going like that, and it just makes the effect of a very pretty looking chain. Very nice. Oh, see, I love that. And that, if you just ignore that first one, because it doesn't lay as flat, but that makes a very nice border, a very nice line, whatever you want to use that for. And if it's placed really close next to each other, it can also be used to fill in color. And when you're finishing that one off, you can just go, you just gotta make sure that you're not gonna undo that whole chain. So you go on the other side of that, just like that. And then for the last one that we're gonna be looking at, this one's called back stitch. Once again, you can, I mean, all of the stitches really you can use for either outlining or filling in, but some look better for some than others, and you can figure it out for yourself which ones you like best. So for back stitch, you're gonna come up like you always do, make a little dash, and then for your next, you know, coming up, you're not gonna come up there or there, you're going to come up where you want the next dash to end. You come up like that, so it's a little gap, and then you go right back down to the end of that previous dash. So it's kind of making a dashed line. And then you come up there, and you keep doing that, and it makes a very nice little dashed line. That one is really nice for borders too, for edges and lines. And so then, when you're satisfied with this beautiful piece of work, when you're done with whatever thread, or you run out of the thread color, or you want to start another color, what you do is you go to the back, and you can take your needle off, so it's just a free thread, and you're just going to tie the same kind of knot that you did at the beginning, because once again, the only purpose of this knot is to keep it from being pulled through. So you can really do any sort of knot you want as long as it's big enough to not get pulled through to the fabric. And then you can, if you don't like that long tail, you can just take your scissors and go whoop, and there you have a finished, you know, piece of stitching. So I'm sure most of you don't want to just do random lines or random squares like that, although you could do that and have it look very cool. So I'm going to show you a little bit about pattern transfer and how that goes. So we'll take this one off, and I happen to have another little piece of fabric here I'm going to put on. So once you have your piece of fabric on your hoop, stretched on your hoop already, and over here I have some patterns that I drew out ahead of time, and I like this chunky raccoon a lot, so I'm going to choose to put him embroider hem. So the easiest way to trace your embroidery is to turn your hoop upside down, like that. So it's laying flat against the picture, flat against the table. And then you can see how with this light colored fabric, it's very easy to see the design behind him, and that is very helpful. So then you take your pen. I recommend, I mean, you can use a pencil, but I recommend against mechanical pencils because they tend to pull the fibers and not really leave a good mark. So I like a pen like this, and so I'm gonna, you know, make sure it's working. Yeah, it's working. And then I'm going to just trace this little guy on. And then you very easily have your design on your canvas. Now, you'll notice that it's on the wrong side of the canvas for stitching. So you can either, you know, work with this faint outline like that, but if you do it that way, just know that it'll be a mirror image of whatever your design was. So be careful if you have words in whatever you're tracing. But what I like to do is I like to just, you know, flip it. It's easy, just take it off, put it back on, no biggie. Oops, there's a hair. Easy peasy, just make sure that your design stays in the middle-ish, so you don't have to worry about that. So there you have your raccoon on your hoop. Now, there's other ways, of course, to get a design onto a hoop to trace or to follow, embroider. You could just take your pen and just, you know, draw whatever you want, just right on the fabric. You could just not even pre-draw. You could try and freehand it just with thread. I prefer to prepare ahead of time just because I find it very hard to, you know, stay on a straight line without one to follow. So now we have our design on. We're going to get the color like before. And you're ready to get started. And I will say also that if you don't have a printer to print out designs that you like, but you have something on a computer screen that you would like to put onto fabric, you can easily, you know, lay your hoop flat side down like before, just against the screen of your computer. It's a little harder to get it to stay still, and you have to make sure that when you're tracing, when you're using your pen, you're pushing down very lightly so that you don't hurt your computer screen. but that's a trick, a little hack to, you know, bypass the needing to print something out. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna do split stitch, where I'm coming back up from the line, and do you see how you can just follow the line? It's very nice to have a pre-drawn line because it makes it so easy to just go right along where you want to go. And I'm just gonna outline this guy. You know, it looks really nice to have a filled in, to have, you know, the whole thing be colored in. I will say that it does look very nice, but it takes, you'd think it might take like twice the time of just outlining it in a color, but it ends up taking about like 10 times the amount of time. So if you are planning to just color the whole thing in, just know that it's going to take far, far longer than if you just outline in a color. And you just go on like that. Switching colors is really easy. It's just like how you did this original color. You just thread it and tie it off, and all the same thing. And embroidery is a very fun and easy way to make some beautiful things, and it's a really great way to jazz up clothing. You know, you can make a patch as a gift. It's really fun to just make, you know, a little piece of embroidery and give it to somebody. People go crazy because they think that, oh, that probably was so hard. But you know the secret, that it's actually pretty simple. It's just doing what I'm doing right now. So I won't show you the whole process, but when you're done and you're happy with it, you can, like I said, you can take the fabric off, you can cut out around it, you can sew it onto something, or you could just have the little patch. Or what you could do is, if you really like your picture just as a picture and you want it to maybe be a piece of wall art, you can just leave it right on the hoop. The only problem with that method is that then you have to buy a lot of hoops, because they are reusable and you do need them for all embroidering, or not all embroidering, but for embroidering like this. So you just have to buy a lot of hoops if you do that way. But they do, you know, you have to admit, they are a nice little frame in themselves, and there's not a whole lot of extra work you have to do to just have a finished product. If you're going to be embroidering on jeans, pants, like that kind of thing, a very firm fabric, and also pretty hard to get a hoop on, like if you want to do a pocket, a hoop is not necessary. It's just, the only thing a hoop does is help you from stretching out the fabric. Here we have our finished product. Like if you're just embroidering on just, you know, here, it would be really easy to make it something that does not lie flat and to get all bunched up and weird. But with jeans and heavier fabrics, they don't really get bunched up like that. They don't get pulled together like that. So as long as you're being careful that you're not